a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Welcome to the interview room, everybody. What a special program we have tonight. We are so grateful that each and every one of you are here with Dr. Brucato and I. Man, oh man, what a day. I had to do this again tonight. I absolutely 100% had to do this. We're so grateful that you're here. Thanks for being with us. This one's a little bit later than usual. And if it's your first time here, we want to welcome you. Want to thank our subs, our members, and of course, our Patreon members. And as always, our big thank you, as always, to our mods, Miss Sophia, Mimi, J2, Maui Girl, and Teresa M. If this is your very first time ever at the interview room, we ask just one thing. And that one thing is you hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, and send this around the world in your social media avenues. We would be very, very grateful for that. Tonight, my dear friend, Dr. Gary Brucato is back. And wow, we're going to talk deep tonight. And we're going to talk about what I believe is unintended consequences. If you don't know Dr. Brucato, he's a PhD who studies how violent thoughts and actions emerge in psychotic versus non-psychotic persons. He's the co-author of the Columbia University Mass Murder Database, which is the largest in the world with over 119 years worth of data. And he's also the co-author of this amazing book here, The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. And of course, you'll probably, if you haven't seen him already, but he's all over the media. He's all over CNN, Nancy Grace, News Nation, you name it, he's been there because of who he is. And his links to his books and everything is below. Well, Gary, what a day, huh? What a day. I know we talked earlier today, and when I woke up this morning, I turned on the news and, of course, like everybody else, they were watching what was going on. And I thought to myself, holy cow, there it goes. There it goes. And, I couldn't watch it. I told Karen, I just said, I can't do this. Turn it off. Make it go away. And so tonight, I want to talk about what the impact is now. And as many of you watched this as well, they tore this house down in record time, I think. And before we get into this, I want to remember, why we're here, why this happened. But we have to remember that the victims who lost their young lives, Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, that's why we're here. That's the whole reason anybody, anywhere in the world is here, i.e. watching this, is because of those 4 young lives. Now, what does that mean in the big picture now, going forward? Gary, from a psychological aspect, you, number one, you nailed the personality, as we all know, of who could have done something to this effect. And Kohberger's personality traits came forward. But you also are convinced that people have to understand the psychological aspect of why the motive psychologically is so important. Do we want to start there tonight from your position, or what are you thinking?
It's fine. I'd be happy to if you.
Okay, go ahead.
Right in with that if that's okay. Well, anyone who's been keeping up with these videos that we've both been on and that you've done individually knows that the position has been put forward that these offenses, whoever committed them, were the acts of a person with a dark fantasy that was played out. That probably the acts represented the culmination of a period of some kind of fantasy, and that fantasy had a not so completely overt sexualized tone to it. And so one of the things we've talked about is that you would expect a very visual individual who, where the house itself figured into the fantasy world, right? We don't know, for example, if the house was selected because of features it had. There are many offenders who talk about choosing a house because of its layout. That figures into things. For example, Israel Keys, the serial killer, would purposely pick houses where there were garages that you could go through that would then have a door that could easily be accessed to take you into somebody's kitchen or other area of their home. Other serial killers talked about balconies and sliding doors and things like that. So, and that gets to one of the points that the father of Kaylee Goncalves posted today. Among other points that was raised there was this question of, isn't the house itself a target? Like removing the house is like eliminating one of the people or the entities targeted in this offense. And I think that there's some truth to that. Now, the other thing that I'll say, which I haven't said yet, is when we talked about the potential motive of whoever did this, we emphasized the fantasy enactment. But there's another piece to it. If Kohberger is indeed the culprit, remember that Kohberger was somebody that was studying what we would call the phenomenology of crime. That means that what he was interested in is, in the most basic terms, he would be interested in what is the internal experience of a person committing crime. He was asking about the psychological, physiological, and other experiences a person had while carrying out an offense. And I think that being somewhat of a scientist, right, who was trying to reduce everything to a predictable science to feel in control, this is somebody who might have said, I need to actually go in and do it to experience it. I can't get it secondhand. I have to feel it to understand that the phenomenology of the offense. And I will see how exhilarated I am and what happens to my heartbeat and how dangerous it is and how the danger figures in and how the experience of the house figures in. There are many scientists who have done things like that. Like, for example, when Schmidt was studying ant bites, he was an entomologist interested in ants, and he created a pain scale to rate how extraordinarily painful it is when certain ants bite you. And to understand that, he let them bite him. And he allowed himself to be bitten by insects that where the pain was blinding and, could put a person, knock a person out. But he needed to have the phenomenological experience. So what you have, if there's any truth to that, is this sort of two-way problem where on the one hand, to really understand the offense from the perspective of somebody like that, fantasy and this kind of full phenomenological experience that he might have been experimenting with, you'd need the house. You'd have to go in there and see what he would. I mean, obviously there were parts of it that we cannot see, thank goodness. But you would want to, all that sensory experience of the creaking of the stairs, and how the rooms looked, and the angles, and and everything else, shadows, the lighting. But then at the other side of it, we need to be able to experience it to understand the crime for the purpose of prosecution, so that all of it, all around, has been gobbled up. And then, of course, you have the final problem with the whole thing, which is that there's this enormous symbolism of all of this basically just being swept away into nothingness, which is extremely upsetting to the families, I'm sure. Anybody who has ever experienced the loss of a loved one, right? Anyone, particularly a child, knows that when it comes time to go in and throw away their things, or take the room that they were in and paint it over, or turn it into some other thing, or rent it to someone, or whatever, it's like having your guts wrenched out of you. You can't do it, and you don't understand that unless you've been there. And I am sure that for the people who understood that that's where their children spent their last minutes, and then to watch somebody come in and just knock it over like it's, and to, against your protest, is profoundly, profoundly tone deaf. Sad. I don't know, Chris, if you agree with that.
I do. And in fact,
curious what you think. Yeah.
I'm going to share the 7 points that, Steve Goncalves made today on his YouTube page. It's the family statement. And it says, where were the, number one, he says, what were the vantage points of the roommates, Dylan and Bethany? What could they hear from where they were in the house? What could they see? How far away was Dylan when she saw BK? And why didn't he see her? Could the surviving roommates hear a dog barking from the third floor or screams? Can you hear those same sounds from the bottom apartment?
Right. And that's a very interesting question, Chris, because it's essentially the same question we asked the last time we were together, right? It sounds like we're not alone, or perhaps our questions got out there and people have been saying, hey, that's a good point. I don't know, but I'm thrilled that we're not the only ones who wondered about it.
Absolutely.
Right? It's odd. Yeah. And I think what they're saying is it's sort of like, it's like someone is saying to us, Dr. Brucato, Chris, you want an answer to that? You need the house to answer it, because we can't explain how you couldn't hear screaming, or you might not have heard screaming, or you might not have heard dog barking without having the acoustic experience of the house. Now we'll never know, because the potential for that science to understand that phenomenology is gone. So now we're like people trying to understand the moon who can't go there, right? We have to understand it from afar. I mean, that's very different than putting your feet on the moon. Right. I mean, that's the whole thing.
Exactly.
So that's, I think we're never going to know now. But
and point number two here, he points out, he says outside the house, if evidence is presented about BK leaving or watching the house, what windows could he see in from? Where was he parked? Was he able to view the inside of the house and what was going on from the outside, sitting in a car or walking by? Goes towards premeditation, he puts in there. How long did it take for him to walk to his car? What points of entry could he have had gotten into the house? These are all very, very valid questions.
All things we've wondered about.
All things. And number three, is there, if there is audio evidence, what can you hear standing outside the house? What can you hear inside the house? Number four, he says, what was Xana's path in the house to pick up the DoorDash? Did she have to walk past different rooms? Could she have walked past BK? Where could he have been hiding? Number five, all the entry and exit points in the home, how could you get in and out without anyone seeing you? Were the decks potentially access points? The decks and landscape features are very close to one another, to each other. Number six, he asked, any biological evidence? Where was it located in the house? Any proximity to the victims and any trail outside of this biological evidence? Number seven, and this is to your point as well, Gary. I mean, we talked about this a long time ago. If the house itself was a target, which was the theory from the beginning, which is the supposed reason the University of Idaho called off the campus-wide warning while BK was still not apprehended. Why was the house a target? And its access, exit points, and the driveway configurations for a vehicle to enter, exit, turn around, vantage points of other camera evidence pointing towards the house. These are just a few things that the family has gone through, that the family has thought of, and no one seems to be able to answer about the King Road house. The question is, if the home is demolished, will all of these questions be able to be answered later on with diagrams, models, technology, if they become an issue at trial? If not, leave the house alone.
Right.
That is a family plea.
Yes, and I think, I can't emphasize enough how intelligent I think the final point is. I mean, they're all great points, but I think that in writing the seventh point, they're getting right to the heart of the kind of crime this is. Because you and I know, I mean, if you've talked to offenders that have committed a home where they cased the house, cased the place for overtime or whatever, you know that it's not enough to have a fantasy target, a surrogate victim to take your stuff out onto, a person you become fixated with. There needs to be an intersection with access, or you'll find another victim. So that, if you're a fantasy oriented person like that, unless you're stalking a particular person and no one else will do, but even with those kind of people, if that target is no longer present because of death or, having moved on emotionally from them, you will find someone else to project that stuff on. And there's an intersection where they'll say, I really wanted that target, but their locks were too good. I really wanted that target, but I couldn't see in their windows. I couldn't. And there are also offenders that will say audaciously, I found the house so easy to access that I interpreted it that they were loose, they were stupid, they deserved to die. That was an extension of the way I saw them, not smart enough to protect themselves, not, too loose, as a person, except. And so that's the kind of terrible stuff offenders say, but they think of that. I read about an offender once who would walk around an entire neighborhood jiggling the doorknobs. And then when he found a door that was open, he interpreted that was an invitation to go in and commit an offense. In other words, there's an intersection between the selection of the house and the selection of the victim. So that point about the house itself being a target cannot be emphasized enough. And now what you've done is you've taken one of the targets and eliminated it, so you cannot fully grasp why it was selected. That's the whole thing. And so I want to know. I still think that whoever committed this, if it was Kohlberg or whoever else, used social media posts of the people moving around the house as intel, to see every inch of it, to see the doors, to see if the doors are generally left open, to see perhaps what the dog does, what kind of people are moving in and out of the house, etc. Now, Chris, do you agree with this idea that the house may have been selected because of vulnerabilities, access, location, etc., in addition to selecting a victim?
100%. I think that house, now that it's gone, we can talk about it all day long,
Mm-hmm.
because that house was a voice for the victims. And now that it's permanently gone, when I say it's a voice, it was a voice for the victim, is, remember, the crime scene told everything that happened there on November 13th in 2022. Now with that house gone, to your point, you can really see the geographical profiling aspect of just how advantageous it was to a perpetrator to sit in the back of that parking lot back there and have all the time in the world to surveil, make plans, process the fantasies you can tell us about more than anybody, quite frankly, on the planet. I mean, you wrote the studies, and you get these guys. And what bothers me today is the only person who is still alive who was there potentially that night is BK. And if so,
The girls downstairs, the two women downstairs, of course, are alive.
yes, the two
But you
girls.
mean who directly experienced the
Yes,
homicide.
exactly.
I mean, if
And
he's guilty, then he would be the survivor.
if he's guilty, allegedly, right, just like he's innocent until proven guilty in a court of law,
Right.
And we have to give him that presumption of innocence, no question about it.
Absolutely.
However, that whole conversation now has just shifted to him. By taking this house down, the prosecution has just amplified, in my opinion, the defense's voice. They have amplified, in the court of public opinion in relationship to people being split one way or another. Okay. And I mean, if we look at just the families themselves, we have 3 families that say leave it, and we have 1 family that says I'm okay with it. But I guarantee you that family, even today, went through an emotional shift. Am I right, Doc?
I can't imagine not. I mean, we don't know. We're not in their minds. But Chris, I mean, I've certainly experienced loss, and I understand that feeling very intimately. I mean, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And just because the prosecution has DNA on a knife sheath, i.e. the buckle, at the crime scene, does not mean they have a slam dunk case, in my opinion. I've been around this block so many times. We just don't know what jurors would do. I mean, we just don't know. And so because they have that, they cannot have this overconfidence that it's a slam dunk. And let me give you an example of what I think is going to be a problem. Another one tonight. I didn't want to do this, but I have to do it after today. So if we look to the left there, that was June 28th, 2023. This was the first time the demolition crew had a briefing on the house in the summertime, and it was covered by Court TV. Okay. So I'm going to just play this quick video real fast. I'm going to put it up here. This is the demo crew inside of the crime scene, behind the tape, as we used to call it. But remember, the university's position has always been, well, the police released it. Everybody released it. And it's okay back in June for us to go in here and start destroying this. Okay. So what they did is as a facade, they left the crime scene tape up to keep everybody out. But on one side of the coin, though, they're projecting to the public that the crime scene is being released. And so they have a meeting. And there are representatives from the facilities department about what they're going to do. And this is courtesy of Court TV, by the way. Okay. Here they're discussing, how they're going to do it. There are people, from the crew there. But what's interesting about this is they then back up a U-Haul truck. Now, mind you, the authorities have said, we're good here. Let's tear this thing down, allegedly. And now they've turned it over to a bunch of quote unquote civilians to back a U-Haul up and pull some plastic up to conceal from the public whatever's going to come out of that house. Okay? Now, from an investigative position, the defense is going to have a field day. They're going to have a field day. And you're going to see why here in a second. Because now you have all these civilians, part of the demo crew or whatever they are, whoever they are. I don't even know who they are. None of my business. But they have 100% access to that house. Okay. Back in the summertime, June, back in the summertime. And then all of a sudden, there's this idea that says, hey, time out. The FBI needs to go into the house in October of 23. Now think about that, Doc. You've got a civilian organization, and you have the FBI going in on the 23rd or October 31st. And what are they going to do? Well, the cops aren't going to tell you what they're going to do. The university tells us what they're going to do. And here's their statement. So you have a compromise in June, i.e., it's done. And now all of a sudden it becomes a crime scene again on October 31st with the FBI. Because the university puts a statement out that says, while the measurements and details needed to build a model were taken at the time of the initial investigations, baloney. The FBI is using this extended trial timeline to gather their own measurements. That means they didn't take measurements. And this is a word salad. And images, now that the personal property has been removed from the premises. Really? Crime Scene 101 is, I guarantee you, the Idaho State Police went in there, took measurements, and yada, yada. But then they started listening to the facilities people and others, probably the lawyers. And guess what? They decided they need a FARO. Well, I did a video about this probably 6 months ago, if not longer. And here's the FBI agent standing on the other side of the tape, running the FARO. This is October 31st, after a truckload of civilians put their own plastic up and remove items they didn't want the public to see. So my question is this fruit of the poisonous tree, as we would call it? Is it tainted? I would submit to you the defense is going to have a field day. Just on these short observations alone. Now, that said, what do you think, Gary? What's going through your mind, Doc?
Well, I'm thinking about how it's problematic not only for the defense, but also, for the prosecution, but also for the defense, because it affects the due process of the suspect. And that's what makes it so particularly strange, that it's an all-around problem in the legal case. And my understanding is, from the reading I did, is that some experts opined, and I think, if I understood correctly, that even the prosecution opined, that the house was so altered that they might not have even been granted permission to go in there with the jury, because it wouldn't have been the same phenomenological experience. It would have been a different place. And that the defense might say, this place is so different, it's biasing you. Now, I was curious what you thought of that position, because that's what people are going to see if they Google around, whatever on this, is that people's argument, the counter argument is, in addition to wanting closure, there really was no benefit because the place was so changed. So this notion of getting this kind of firsthand experience goes out the window, and they literally might not even be granted it if they tried. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I'm curious what you think.
Well, I think it's hogwash.
Yeah.
I mean, every crime scene is altered once it's been processed. Every single crime scene in every single murder in every single country in every part of the world is altered. Every single one of them. Now, the advantage to having a jury go in there is it's their opinion that counts. And it's the sensory alteration that you can't replace.
Right.
The acoustics, the lighting, all of this stuff. If they took items out of the walls, if they took floorboards, that's a bunch of hooey. Evident of the fact that you had all those civilians right there in June walk in and out of that place. Okay, every single one of those individuals that we just saw here, and by the way, this is the demolition crew in June.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of these people walked into this altered crime scene. Well, how can they do it then?
Well, you read my mind, because wouldn't the same argument hold that by the time they went in and took these measurements and so forth that are supposedly going to be just as good, well, then all they did was preserve a crime scene that had been altered by taking photos of it and measuring it and whatever. So perhaps it, again, that Columbo-esque turn of mind that we sometimes have, is that you can't reconcile that in your head. It doesn't make sense. I mean, how could that be a logical answer? Well, on the one hand, we think it's too altered. That's why we don't need to preserve it. Secondly, you don't need to worry because we preserved it virtually. Well, what you preserved is exactly the same place you said wouldn't do the trick. So what? So do you get where what I'm saying, Chris?
100%. In fact, but by the fact that the FBI went in there, right, to create, maybe audio or physical model of the home using the FARO. And what the FARO is, everybody, is it's a 3D scanner. And you see these little look like targets there. That's for photography. It's basically the scanner locks onto that and it kind of focuses and then it spins. It spins in a 360 degree turn. And what it does is it picks up everything around. The problem that we have here is this is October in 2023 that they're outside doing this. They should have done this the very first couple of days, just like I said in the beginning about how they left the victims' cars out there for almost a week. Those vehicles should have been towed the night of the homicide, the next day. They should have got a tow company in there, towed each and every one of those vehicles out, put them into a tow yard, and then they could be processed later on. Instead, they left them out front and put a piece of barrier tape around it. Nobody knows what, if anything, could have been found on those vehicles. Did he touch the vehicle, i.e., like to your point, Dr. Brucato, without gloves? Did he have his gloves on? Could he have walked by and just tapped one of those cars? Well, those cars were left out there in the snow.
Well, Chris, I mean, knowing what we know about the fantasy life that likely surrounded the individual who committed these crimes, I mean, wouldn't you have done things like even examine the trees outside and things like that, dusted for prints like on windowsills, and checked if he was up on the roof? And in other words, I'm sure they checked some of those things, but not all of them, I would bet. I mean, probably this is a person who was in some manner surveying that house. And my personal hypothesis, I don't know what you think about this, but my personal hypothesis is, because sometimes people ask the question, oh, if the house was being watched, how could the killer not know that Kaylee was going to be there with the dog, and that Xana and Ethan were awake and eating? Well, my hypothesis is that whatever was being used to survey the house had to be turned off when it was time to go in, and then the person lost the intel of any further developments, because if the idea is like you go into pilot mode, a plane mode or whatever, and now you lose access, then all these developments can occur that you didn't expect, and then you get in there expecting to target one individual, and everything has gone haywire. And what bothers me is we don't know if something was hidden there. Was there a tiny little, mechanism that was being used? Now it might just be swept away with the trash.
It's gone.
But I mean, Chris, do you also suspect that place was being there was some surveillance, or do you think it was likely just through windows and things like that? I mean, do you think there was some way that somebody was intimately experiencing the inside of the house?
It's quite possible that if he tapped into their internet, that he had access to view into that home. It could have been through a device. It could have been a device left. It could have been through a laptop. It could have been through a smart TV. There are all kinds of ways that people can hack once they get into your internet system. And what's sad here, the other sad part about this is just the posturing of the messaging. I mean, we have this messaging that says, this could take months and months, to build this virtual model together, and of course the university comes out in October and says, well, they're just there to collect more, measurements and virtual, et cetera, because it's going to take months to put this together. And there was an former attorney general in Idaho that says it appears the prosecution is putting a major emphasis on virtual models and videos to help the jury understand how the crime went down that night. So in my opinion, the victims have now become avatars. The house has become an avatar to a digital world.
That's an interesting comment.
Well, they have taken the voice away from the victim, i.e. eyewitness testimony, i.e. maybe, and I think everybody understands, you don't always get an opportunity to go to the crime scene. Juries don't always make adventures to the crime scene. But in something like this is 4 college students slaughtered in their beds, and it's an international event. It's not just the university. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, you see, in a prior episode, one of the things I said was I thought that this represented a part of a kind of current zeitgeist, the thing that you see in our culture where people eliminate any trace of the past that is ugly, and to sort of wipe it out. And I think what I'm realizing and I'm listening to you is that part of the logic behind that is you're sitting here telling me that those people are victims, but by having to look at this, I'm a victim. So that in order to not be victimized by looking at that place, I need to tear it down. So that it's a displacement of the concept of who the victim is.
Yes.
Right. So like if you say we have to get rid of that, the remnants of that concentration camp because the terrible stuff that happened there, like we're being confronted with it, and that makes me feel bad. Then what you're basically saying is I'm the victim. I know you think those people who died there are, and I know you're trying to prevent future ones, but I am a victim. And I think that's really part of the essence of the contemporary culture. It's a kind of a victim-based culture where you're basically saying, I'm the center of attention, not you. I'm the victim, you're not, right? So here we are with multiple episodes dedicated to the destruction of the house. And, and it's like, and then the destruction of the house, front page news, literally, right? So it's like, and you're sitting there going like, who is the victim here? Right. And I think the other thing is we're missing the point that the people of the state, right, may wind up victims if this person is freed. That's the other thing, because if this individual is fantasy based, the probability of offending again may be higher. So that's the other piece of it is like, is anybody thinking of that? So like, to me, the question really becomes, how dare you suggest that you're the right? I mean, isn't that at the heart of this, like a kind of a chutzpah?
Well, and they've shifted that victimology even further into Dylan and Bethany, the 2 survivors. I mean, Dylan comes face to face with this mass killer, dressed head to toe in, in all black, and he's got bushy eyebrows. He leaves the home, and according to the affidavit, she freezes, she locks up. Well, okay, well, what's going to happen now when she's on the stand? And I said this, a couple of weeks ago, when she's cross-examined over and over and over again, and a digital, playground comes in, a virtual world. I mean, I heard somebody say, well, they're going to wear these VR glasses. Okay. Well, you know what? One of our mods, Teresa M, said, well, that's like doing a virtual trip to Disney World. It's great. It's fine. And I love technology. We've come a long way, but nothing can replace feeling that room. And so I think the potential unintended consequences are going to be huge. The prosecution asked the court just recently for a summertime trial date. And to me, I'm going to put a bingo card on this. And those of you who are in my TRR family know what I mean by this. Put a bingo card up in the avatar or in the chat out here. But I think this is going to play into the advantage of the defense.
Right. And Chris, what a lot of people in the chat are saying is they're wondering if the argument could be made that the university opened itself up to lawsuits.
Yeah, I think so too. A civil.
Right. It's an interesting point. I mean, I'm not commenting on it because but it sounds like a lot of people are thinking. I think what they're suggesting is that there might be civil lawsuits.
Yeah, and the more time passes, and by the way, the defense just filed another motion. It's a special action motion. They're appealing the appeal of, where the court says we're going to keep moving on this thing. The defense just filed another one on the 22nd that said, hey, we want to extend this one more time. And if it's a special action, that means it could go to the appellate court, at least as in some states. I'm not positive in Idaho, and somebody keep me honest here. But the way it works in other states is if it's a special action, they can immediately go to the appellate court, and the appellate court will hear the argument. Or they'll just say, no, we're not going to hear that argument. It stays down in the superior court, and the judge has already made up his mind. Okay? But if they circumvent that and go immediately to the appellate court could say, hey, you know what? I grant that motion. And now that the house is destroyed, the defense is in a much better position because they can now put witnesses on the stand that will talk about the preservation of evidence till the conclusion of a trial forever. They just opened a door, and this is why in my opinion, the defense attorney has just out-lawyered the prosecution. And I'm talking, as you know, Gary, I'm well past 300 murders in my career. I had a 90% solvability rate. Anybody can check that box. Okay. And the reason is because I was told one time by a very dear friend of mine, he was his DA in San Diego, his name is Mark Bettine. He says, you know what makes you so dangerous, McDonough? And I said, I have no idea. He says, you think just like a defense attorney. He said, whenever you turn in a case, everything is there. If it's a plus or a minus, it's there. So there's no place to go. And I said, well, I appreciate you saying that. And this is why I've pointed out, even as simple as what we just saw here a minute ago, you've got these, the people that are going to tear the house down in June. Then you've got the university saying, yeah, but the FBI still needs to get back in there. Well, okay, folks, which one is it? Are we compromising the evidence in June? Well, you can bet the defense is going to ask that question. If I were them, I would put the owner of the trucking company on the stand. Say, so what exactly did you pull out of the house in June when you have this U-Haul up there? Kind of like the police when they did it, when they had custody of the home, right?
But Chris, let me ask you something. This may be a naive question, and perhaps there are people in the audience that can give us an answer to this. But I'm aware of many incidences. For example, in 2019, there was a desire to tear down a historic home in San Mateo called the Lathrop House. And I remember that the way they resolved it was they literally put the entire historical house on wheels and moved it. Why
Yeah,
couldn't the house be moved?
right.
Moved somewhere to be analyzed? Why did it have to be torn down? That's what I don't understand. I mean, even people who want to tear down historical monuments and things, most of them, in my experience, believe they should just be tucked away in museums. They don't want to set them on fire or something. They just don't want to look at them. So the question is, why couldn't the house be moved? Was it too big? Was it, would it be too complicated? I mean, then you would preserve the floorboards and the blood and and all the other traces. And, I mean, why couldn't it? I'm just curious. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, they could have put it on wheels and moved it.
There are companies that do that. You're 100% right, but
Must be the money. It has
I
to be
don't
the
know.
cost.
I mean, it seems like they want to put it behind them and they want to keep going, right? As if this is going to go away. If anything, they have just created a larger narrative that you can, right? You and I both know, in the news business, they say this story has legs. There is nothing worse than seeing one of your homicide cases above the fold in the newspaper, and then you look at who the journalist is, and you go, "That turkey, how in the world did they get this information? Who's talking?" And the defense played a card here very strategically by stipulating to the destruction of the home. They sat back and they said, "Oh, we're done. We're done. We're good. Whatever you want, tear it down, make it go away. We're on your team." Okay? Well, that's their job, to defend Brian Koberger. What the prosecution should have been saying is what you just said. What are our options? Where do we go here? Because but now what can happen, I mean, let's play this out hypothetically, okay? And this is just a hypothetical. The defense can now create narratives. To your point, let's say the prosecution comes up and they say, well, we have A, B, C, and D, and we have, him tapping into cameras, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Did you sift all of the debris, Detective X? No, we didn't do that. So you don't know if there's exculpatory evidence about my client over here in that debris, do you? But you guarded it because you didn't want people taking, morbid trophies home. You guarded it for that, but you didn't. What about the knife? Have you guys found the knife? Could the knife have been in that apartment? Then, and these are going to be open-ended type of questions: woulda, coulda, shoulda. And so the defense can create narratives now that did not exist. And what they're doing is they're laying a foundation for an appellate reversal. And that's just my opinion, because they can come back later and saying destroying that house. Again, the prosecution got rid of exculpatory evidence that could have helped Brian Koberger. And of course, an appellate court could listen to an argument like that and go, you know what? We agree with you. We agree. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. And it doesn't necessarily mean he won't get convicted. But what it may mean is they're playing the long game here. They're playing the long, the 300-yard, par 5. And they just stepped up and they just smacked it. 425 yards, the biggest shot anybody's ever seen. They tore the house down. And they're sitting there going, okay, well, we just need a pitching wedge and a putter, and we'll be good. Okay. So this isn't about winning right now for the defense, in my opinion. It's about setting up an appellate play. And the university played right into it for them. Because people are going to sit there. They're still going to, I think more people are going to come by and see where it was than more people keeping it, if they would have left it up and people would have driven by and gone, ooh, that's that house. Now, I mean, you tell me about the morbidity or the, people are writing Koberger in jail. They're in love with him. What about the other aspect of this, right? The curiosity side of this, Doc, tell me.
Well, look, one thing I was very curious about when the house was being torn down is if there were any people there collecting mementos or taking dust or pieces of wood or thing to. I mean, I'm going to be keeping my eye on some of these websites that peddle murderabilia and all that, because unfortunately, you are going to attract people like that, who are interested in that kind of stuff. Somebody once gave me as a gift a bottle of dust from a historic murder house. There had been like some repair done to the home, and somebody literally collected the dust up and put it in a little bottle and gave it to me as a present. I mean, I have it sitting inside me. What am I supposed to do with it? But this idea that people think that there's value in that is sort of creepy. The thing that bothers me about this whole thing, and well, there are many things, but one of them is that, it's like an intentional toying with the way that memory operates, right? The way that we all are constantly actively reinventing our memories to bring them in line with what we want to believe and whatever. And the only thing that helps to not do that is to be confronted with hardcore physical evidence that reminds you, like breadcrumbs back home, to the truth. Otherwise, you're gonna distort your memories and recreate them and rewrite them and reinvent them. And that's what I'm worried about. Is like, if people already have that tendency, you should work against that tide. You should try to prevent the deterioration of the accuracy of memory. Not take away a gigantic piece of evidence that is needed to bring us back into the. So but I mostly. My experience of the whole thing is really one of that the whole thing was just tone deaf. I really think. I think emphasizing the pragmatic reasons for it, it just keeps missing the point that you can't be someone who has experienced grief and understand why it's okay to just sweep up people. I was telling you, Chris. I mean, without getting into a lot of detail about it, I was once, and I won't say where this was, but I was once in an emergency room with a serious health problem. And I was laying in one of these few beds that were available in the ER, and across from me was a person who was like behind a curtain. There were many doctors in there examining the person. So then they opened the curtain, and the woman is laying on the bed, and a person that I perceived to be her daughter was there, and she said something like, "Oh, Mom, I got to go, find some quarters and put them in the meter. We're obviously going to be a while. So she steps out, and in the meantime, in the 20 to 30 minutes of this person being away, the mother, in full view of everybody, goes into cardiac arrest or something, and all these doctors descend, and they're trying to revive her and the whole thing, and she passes away. They cover her up, they wheel her away, and literally came with those long brooms, and just swept away the rubber gloves, the caps from things that they were using, and in many ways even the person's property, just took it all away. And
Wow.
when the daughter came back, she said, "Mom, I put the coins in the meat." She said, "Where's my mother? Did you move her up to a room? Did you?" I said, "Oh, your mother passed away." "Where is she?" What? Literally just gobbled up. And I still, like a person can close his eyelids and still see the sun after staring into it. I can still see that woman's face when they told her that her mother had died and just been taken away and everything with her, and now it was time to use that room for another person because beds were few and far between, and she was going to go to wherever her mother's remains were. And I always think about that, that way that we can forget the humanity of individuals. I mean, Chris, what do you think about that point?
I think that is a fascinating analogy, and I think the fact that you witnessed it.
Oh yeah, I'll never forget it.
I cannot. One of the things that I was thinking this morning when I saw this going on, I had to, in my mind, I shifted to every one of those parents. You know, it was really hard to watch it happening. Not because, well, you know more than anybody, and I think those of us who have lost, children, the impact just watching that, it reflected on me of, you know what, dang it, I should have done more. I should have said more. I should have talked louder. And because I felt what those parents were probably feeling now that it's gone. I mean, and to your point, it's like the broom coming in,
Right.
and it's just swept right away.
Right.
And now what? They don't even have closure yet.
Right. I mean, do you think they said to the families, "You want to do a walkthrough before the place?" I mean, well, now maybe there's stuff there that's too upsetting, so
Right.
you wouldn't do that. But perhaps they might say, "Do you want to stand outside? Do you want to say a prayer? Do you want to, do you want to have achieve some sense of closure?" And I'll tell you, Chris, not only from personal experience, but from treating people who have had loss, unbelievable loss, that there is a phenomenon that occurs where you feel guilty to get rid of even the person's socks and underwear and pants and things, because their toothbrush, because you feel that by doing that, it's like you're saying that the person was just garbage, that it's okay to just quickly sweep them away. And that's the whole thing where I think the tone deafness comes in. I don't mean to cast aspersions or anything. I just think that once you have a family saying, "I'm not ready," didn't they deserve, I mean, having lost?
Well, and not only that, the house didn't even belong to the school. It belonged to a private owner out of Colorado during the commission of the crime. That individual donated it to the school, and the school kept driving the narrative that we just saw today. It wasn't the cops. In fact, it's the lawyers that were driving a narrative. I read an email that says, the way you've outlined what you guys are talking about, i.e., it's from the prosecution to the school. And it was like, well, wait a minute, who's taking command of this crime scene here for these victims? Okay, great. We've got modern technology. We can put people on the moon. Okay, wonderful. Okay. We've got electric cars. Okay. But guess what? When an ion battery catches fire, there's no way to put it out. Just ask any firefighter out there. They're on fire.
Right.
Electric cars are on fire. Okay. Well, this is to your point. This is one of these situations where it's just like, okay, guys, okay, we got a plan here. Okay, what's our plan? Well, let's check with the authorities first, and then yada yada, whatever it's going to be. And I want to answer Kimmy's question here. The defense agreed to the demo just as the prosecution did. Wouldn't that prevent them from using the demo as a defense tactic? No, it wouldn't. They can file a motion at any time during trial, because what they could do is, if they discover, quote, new evidence, okay, then the other stipulations become irrelevant, and they can argue with the judge. They can get to, an in-camera hearing. They can go up and do a sidebar with the judge, and then they can argue all day long. We're already seeing it with the appellate decisions. We're already seeing it. We saw it with this defense team very early. The way to get around the gag order was to write these motions, knowing that they would be public and that every one of us in the world would read them and start talking about them. Doc, this one's yours.
I think that there are many reasons. I mean, I think that, first of all, as some people are saying in the chat, it's vicariously triggering, because people have had their own experience of loss or victimization. And so there's that. I think for some people, it activates feelings of, who's in charge here? Are the authority figures being sensitive? Is this some kind of ridiculous situation where people are almost assisting the offender, whether they're doing so consciously or not? I think for some people, it triggers feelings of injustice. And then I just think some people are very empathic and can vicariously experience how sad and awful it is for other people. I think there's a lot of reasons, but on the simplest level, any human being, I think, with reasoning power should be able to at least abstractly understand that there were a few good reasons not to do this. And so you just kind of sit there going like, I don't get the judgment. So I also think that when people are intelligent, it sort of boggles the brain. And I think there's some mixture of those factors for most of us, I think, who are, who are being trying to be sensitive. But I just want to keep coming back to the family's reaction. And Chris, have you seen any posts other than Kaylee's father's post? I mean, from any of the other families, have they made any comments? Did they say, look, to our great shock, this gave us closure? Or did they say we're devastated? Or what did they say?
No, I think, well, Xana's parents or Xana's family has come out and they're like, why are you doing this? They're right in line with, the other family members, the Goncalves family. I mean, they're devastated that this happened. I mean, just think of the emotional response. And I'm going to answer Sally here real fast. And thank you so much for your sensitivity in asking this question. My situation's been over 20 years. So, but it does, as Dr. Gary knows, it doesn't go by at all. It's always there.
May as well have happened yesterday.
Yeah, like it was yesterday. And my situation, I will share with you, the public, that I was at Disneyland. I can tell you where I was standing. I was at the teacups watching. We had a family member in town watching the family member's kids, my nieces, and were on the teacups when my phone rang. And it was my daughter. And she was screaming into the phone, Dad, Ryan's dead, Ryan's dead. And I was like, what are you talking about? And Karen and I, we just kind of, I can't tell you how I got out of Disneyland, to be honest with you. It was kind of a shock thing. And yes, we drove right to the location, which to this day still didn't give me closure. Okay, I have closure now, but it was just this magnification of emotion that I never experienced in any other situation that I've ever been in. And it was just this massive emotional breakdown. And this is probably why I'm so, as Garrett, Dr. Brucato, I'm sure he's evaluated me more than once. And, it's what's made me today. I feel that I try to be very empathetic and caring person, a better person, because that's what my son would want me to do. And when I see, when we see stuff like this, as simple as crazy as this is, the fact that, it's happening to these poor families right now, they're, one of the families is going, okay, it's over. No, it's not. It's not over. It's just begun.
Right.
And it's going to take, it will never get over. It will always be there. It will always be there. And for the community just to come up and say, well, we need a park and we don't want to remember this anymore. How insensitive is that to the 4 victims? This was their voice. That house was their voice. The prosecution is their voice. It is their job to tell the story. It's not their job to say, okay, we agree with you, it needs to come down. There was no rush to make this thing come down other than other forces at work pushing it. And I don't know why. I'm in heritage preservation in Canada. Thank you, Laura. Moving homes requires structural analysis by a certified engineer to show whether the tie house is structurally sound to be lifted in place. The Moscow house looked very, very poorly constructed. Okay.
Well, I think that's very useful, but then that raises the question, did somebody take the time to evaluate whether it was possible? I mean, that opinion is being made from glancing at it here. But what did anyone ask the question at the time? I mean, that's what's bothering me. I mean, was a report done? Did somebody say, we made every effort to retain the house, but just to get it out of sight? But we determined that we couldn't, and we're terribly sorry. I have to say, I doubt it. Don't you, Chris? I think that option was on the table.
No, I don't think. I think there was communication with some of the family from the university side, but it was all driven by the lawyers, and that communication should have been coming from the prosecution and the police. Remember, early on, one of the complaints of the families were the cops aren't telling us anything. And I did a piece on this a while ago where I said, look, one of the first things we need to do as law enforcement, is embrace these families quickly. And you usually assign somebody to do that. I mean, I've had many, many high profile cases. I mean, I've walked out of crime scenes with 13 satellite trucks from around the world, including Japan. Okay. In Southern California, we had every media market you can think of. It was all there. Okay. And so even Telemundo, remember I was only, 30 miles from the border. So we were being seen all over the world. And there's no understanding that pressure that comes, okay, with that. So when you see the video that I did last night about the two cops picking up the jacket and dropping it, going, yeah, well, that is not that is a clear that's a clear message. Mistakes were made, and that's why in the Cold Case Foundation, why we have a foundation. Because, right, Gary? I mean, you remember we have the Mayo approach, and we, put 30, 40 or 30, whatever experts in a Zoom wall, and we debrief cases with law enforcement all around the world. And we tell them, well, did you think about A, B, C, or D? I did a case we did a case, cold case, about 2 years ago with the State Department for a young boy that was killed in Russia. And the family wanted us to look at it. And we had all these experts from around the world to look at it. And we came to some decisions, and we told them about it. In this particular case, these kind of things that are going on like this, it's very interesting to see happening. And Lieutenant, the super chat that was up there, you're right. You're 100% right. And here's a couple more here. Thank you for being the family. This is true, based and stays focused on the victims. I learn so much every time I watch. Well, thank you, Ms. Riley. Appreciate you very much. And we answered this one.
Right. Yeah, you already addressed it.
Yeah. I'm trying to make sure I've got all the questions here.
The other piece of it, Chris, is I just keep thinking, if Brian is guilty, what was he thinking?
Yeah, you tell us. I mean, you're into these guys' heads every single day.
It's just, I mean, I don't know if he has access, to like, an iPad or something like that, and was able to view it or just heard about it, but
they do. He's a vegan. They're giving him special food. It's ridiculous.
But it's just, you find yourself wondering, did he think, haha, gotcha, something like that? Or did he think there were things I knew they could have found there and now they never will, haha, all of that. I can't help but think about that, about what the psychology is of from the other side. I mean, if he is guilty, he can only be thinking this is good, and that it represents the culmination of a kind of eradication of these people from the world, right? Remember, Ed Kemper, the serial killer, used to say that for him, it wasn't so much killing as it was evacuating people from their bodies and their lives.
Oh, interesting.
Right? That it was a way of saying, get out. You don't have a home here, right? I get to dictate who has a home, because that had happened to him. He had been sort of hurled out of the home and went to go live with, different people and so forth. So that it's that quality of saying, now I've completed the act, and that's ugly to me. Perhaps I'm too sensitive of a person, but I can't help but experience it from that angle and imagine that it's like giving him something if he's guilty, and that really, it gets to me.
How deep do you think he will process this? Like, I mean, hypothetically, because I mean the house had so much symbolism to him, didn't it?
Well, it's interesting because you really can't take away the memories from somebody who is a visually oriented, offender, if that's what he is. Remember Sam Little, the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history, decades after the offenses, could so perfectly envision the crimes that he could tell you the jewelry people were wearing, what their hair looked like, their facial expression at the time of death, where it took place, etc. And so that it's like frozen in their brain, so that I think you have to picture a person in a jail cell repeatedly revisiting a scene, right? Probably becoming aroused by it, or thinking I could have done this better, or whatever. But you and I and most people don't have that kind of visual experience. I believe that's a sign of being a psychopath, because I think of psychopaths as essentially people where how do I say this? The brain is stronger in terms of the visual and not in the kind of emotional and verbal, right? So that what you get is an individual that thinks like a hunter, like a master hunter. And those kind of people, in an almost animal way, can picture a visual experience and say, if it, like a game of chess, if I go down that hallway, they're going to do this. If I go in that window, they're going to do this. If they come this way, they'll go that way. Whatever. So that you have to imagine a person who can perfectly envision and then plot and scheme and so forth. And what people like that do is they retain memories, objects that will transport them back to the experience, right? To when they hold that object or whatever. But they've internalized those objects a lot of the time, right? Sometimes they eat them, like Dahmer. They eat their trophies, right? So that what you wind up with is a person who you can't take that from them. So I don't know how much having the actual house there matters to him. All I know is that if he ever were free, and he is guilty, if he's guilty and he ever gets free, that combo, he would go back to the place and become very excited at the idea that he had made all of this happen, right? So that you picture a person when they're watching the house come down, feeling almost as if they reached into the world like the finger of God and made this happen. Like this destruction is, I caused everything that happened in that house. I'm the reason you even know who these people are. I'm the front, I'm the reason you're on the front page. So that what you picture is a puppet master. And the puppet master, with all these different people, whether they know it or not, being strung along, and kind of operating accordingly, according to the person's fantasy, including people who fall in love with him, right? People who do his bidding by running all over the internet and making outrageous comments and insulting people and making up phony evidence to defend, right? The hyperstophilics, the people who, kind of ask questions in the face of incredibly incontrovertible facts that seem to be asked just to sort of stir doubt, in a defense of a person because you're enamored of them, people, etc. And what you get is people that don't realize they're on puppet strings, right? The admiration. I mean, Chris, I saw. It's funny. Kimmy, who was asking questions here, sent me images from a subreddit where there's a whole world of people who think that Brian Koberger is so attractive that they create memes and things of him with hearts around him, him, with his head superimposed over like somebody with a six pack. Yeah, there's Kimmy. Someone with six pack, him, in sexualized kind of provocative setting. I mean, and so the question is, who's pulling the strings with that kind of person? And that's what bothers me about the whole thing is that watching that house get torn down, it's almost like you could picture the offender moving his fingers like a puppeteer. And that bothers me because, it's adding to the pain. One of the things that the Cold Case Foundation emphasizes that is one of the many things I love about it is that victimization does not stop with the person who is killed. It has a ripple effect through the family and society itself, who are what might be called vicarious victims. Wouldn't you say, Chris?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, those of us who've had people taken out of our lives, it might as well have been us.
The solid point. I mean, and the other piece of this is, if we think globally, right, in terms of what the trial is going to present here, he's got family members as well. I mean, he's got a mother, a father, sisters, etc. Now, we don't know if he is going to be found guilty or not. So at this point, again, we always have to give the court what they need, i.e., the presumption of innocence.
No question about it. I mean,
and so,
which we say 100 times every time we talk. Yeah, of course.
And so at this point, I think even the family members are going, how does this impact him? Meaning the jurors are going to be looking at this potentially and going, well, that's probably not good ultimately. But they're going to go through some process too. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's not even comparable to what these family members of these 4 victims are experiencing.
Correct. I agree.
Right. It's not even close, right? But I mean, Doc, you said in the very beginning, before they caught him, and I know I keep going back to this, but I think it's important for our audience to understand here that if he is the guy, he is just reveling tonight that his phone rang or his attorney went over to the jail and sat down with him and said they did it if he didn't see it. And I would submit, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, keep me on the honest track here. He's elated tonight that this house is gone.
I think he may feel powerful. He may feel powerful that strings were pulled, that it may help his case, that he, but also that there's this eradication of people that he thought very little of. If he's the guy, right? Whoever did this, if it's not him, if somebody is out there reveling, yeah, it can only be something that they would enjoy. And it's another way of saying, now they're all mine. Doesn't have to be shared with anybody. It's all mine. All there is what's up here. Nobody can go there and take that from me. It's now a land that exists only for me here.
I remember you saying that on Dateline about the ultimate, right? That he now possesses all 4 of them forever.
Well, that's what it's all about. Because remember, this is a person who appears to think like a scientist, and it's all about predictability. Now you always know where they are, and you always know where that house is, which is here. It's been gobbled up and ingested, and now exists only in his belly, and it's his. That's what bothers me.
Yeah, I think this is what common sense tells us as well, and the family is experiencing it. I mean, definitely, Kaylee's family, they've been a voice out front. They're just rocking tonight in terms of, oh, what does this mean? And the sad part of this, at this point, we don't know what it really means. We don't know yet.
No, but Chris, let me ask you something.
Mm-hmm.
If the defense went in and talked to Koberger, and he thought it would be advantageous to not tear the house down, would they have put up a fight and kept that house up?
Yes, I think the prosecution or the defense would have. Yes.
So,
Yeah. No. Yeah. Point made. Touche.
I mean, I can't help but think, believe me, that place would be standing. He would find a way to persuade, because I think that is a persuader. That that's the kind of person. It was his way or the highway, right? So
where is he in your book? Number 6. He's a 16.
If he's guilty, he'd be a 16. Yeah. Unless we discover that there was a more overt sexual motivation, like for example, he had gone in with the intention of essaying someone.
Self-centered, psychopathic individuals who commit 2 or more acts of extreme violence.
Right, but there are subtypes, and this is a person who would fall into the mastermind subtype, where we would place people like Ted Kaczynski, Zodiac, Son of Sam. In other words, there isn't an overt sexual motivation. But look, I mean, I could get into details of this, and I know people would gobble it up because people are very, very interested in these cases. So I'll just say something very quickly. If you let's say we were to take the case of Zodiac. In the case of Zodiac, you don't have, thank you, Chris. In the case of Zodiac, you don't have overt sexual motivations, right? But then when you carefully examine the crime, you start to notice that the men are rather quickly eliminated where there are couples, and the women are kept alive a little longer, right? And you start to wonder why, and then they die. They die. Sometimes the men, like for example, Mike Mageau lived, and Darlene Ferrin died. It was like overkill with her. Why the emphasis on the females? Was that an expression of some hostility toward them? The male is just expendable, but the woman is the center. For example, in the first offense that is definitely on the table as a Zodiac crime, you had this thing where he actually puts like a pencil light, like pen light, on the back of the scope of his firearm, and in the pitch dark shines the light on the back of this woman running in the darkness to fire at her, so that he can enjoy, the screams and the running and the hunting and the whole thing. But the male has been very rapidly eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
So you start saying, is that a little sexualized? At Lake Berryessa, where he puts on his ridiculous executioner costume, the stabs to, the male victim are, sort of confined to the back and so forth, and he lives, by the way. But Cecilia Shepard, the female, is stabbed in places that have a sexualized quality to them, right? So that the concentration is, near sexual zones of the body. So you start thinking maybe it's a little covertly sexualized, but he's not as open about it as some serial killers are, right? And you saw that also with David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, right? So that there was a sexualized quality to that. He tried to pretend that he did what he did because a dog was talking to him. He feigned psychosis. It was John Douglas who famously got him to admit that that was a made-up story, and a completely made-up story. He was not talking to a dog. And, of course, what really was going on was that he was a kind of garden variety pervert and kind of social loser who would feel very powerful because he would do things like set fires and then watch people descend upon the fire to put it out. And he'd say, I did that. I pulled the strings. You're all here. So that again, you have the touch of the scientist, the mastermind, right? The Moriarty, the person who is not seen, but his agents are seen, or the strings are seen, but he is not seen in the shadows. And so what you get with that kind of person is a quality where they're enjoying psychologically the power to make you do what they want to do. That's the essence of that kind of the mastermind kind of person. And what happens with those kind of people, and it's true of, it was true of Ted Kaczynski, and it was true of Son of Sam, and it's true of other people in this category, is that the people who know them say they were arrogant, they always had to have the last word, they were condescending. As soon as they were given a little power, they became outrageous with it. They had self-righteous ideas about being on a mission where they had to cleanse the world of some evil group or and what people like that sometimes do is they even take on an identity, right? The Unabomber, which a name given to the offender, Zodiac, which was a name given to the self, Son of Sam. So the person takes on that identity because they become a character in the darkness and behind their letters and behind. You also notice, and we said this from the beginning, this is the type who would write letters and insinuate himself, because there's another way of pulling the strings. So you insinuate. So what I'm getting at is, for a person who isn't just possibly sexually
would go towards this question right here.
Oh yeah, well, exactly. But I'm going to touch on that in 1 second. So this is what I'm driving home here, and I hope the whole audience grasps this, and I'm sure they will. This is a bright group. Is that I think there are really three motivations with whoever committed this. One is this quasi-sexualized thing that has to do with leveling the playing field against people who have hurt you, that you now are projecting, really displacing onto one or more individuals' hatred towards the whole group. Second, a scientific process of wanting to reduce people to a predictable bunch because their emotions are too complicated for you. That's the kind of person who would prefer animals because they're much more predictable and loyal, and you can get them down to a science, right? So that kind of person would say, let me go in and actually phenomenologically experience this myself, and now I'll understand it all. And then the third is the power that comes, the egotistical, godlike power experienced by making things happen. And that's where that kind of person looks an awful lot like the kind of serial killer who will do things like be a doctor who kills his own patients because you're the arbiter of life and death, or you're the one who gets attention because you're on the scene when you're the first one on the scene when the person is like goes into cardiac arrest or whatever, but nobody realizes that you made it happen yourself, right? So you're a phony hero, and you get that phony heroism in this kind of people too, right? Like, oh, I'm here to help you, but you're actually causing the offense. It's all about those,
which we know it's in the affidavit. That's what they heard.
So it's all three of those things, right? And so getting to this, was he Papa Rogers? Well, we don't know for sure, but let's put it this way. It would be entirely consistent with the profile of this offender, which I stated before there was even a culprit, a potential culprit found, is that this is the kind of person who would not be able to resist insinuating himself in writing into a situation, because how else could he enjoy the manipulation? So it's the kind of person who would enjoy throwing off people who might be smart enough to be patching a narrative together. So you have to throw phony stuff in there. And it's not just to preserve yourself. It's not just to keep yourself from trouble. It's that's part of the motive. You have to understand that. That's how a person who is as small as a crumb makes himself feel like God. That's the whole thing. But what these people fail to understand is that that's not the nature of God. That's not how it operates. The nature of God is the small, right? I mean, here we are, the Christmas season just behind us. The nature of God is to come in the form of a baby, lay in a filthy manger, and stare up at the stars that you yourself created. Right?
I just love the way you think. You are.
But isn't it true?
Yeah, you are so deep sometimes that it's just fantastic, just
It's just
fabulous. And by the way, everybody, if you are not recognizing the master class going on here, I mean, I'm just blessed to be Dr. Brucato's friend because we have these conversations for hours sometimes, and they're just so fascinating because he understands these people. He gets it. This is his life. And it is just so. Look at this here, right here. I love the book, Dr. Because one of my favorite Christmas gifts this year.
I have to say, there's a special type of person who could appreciate the book, and you have to be somebody who really wants to understand on a deep level these kinds of things. And I believe that to get to the truth, you have to be willing to look at the ugly and the dark. I
Yeah.
get very frustrated with people who say, "Oh, there are a lot of details in the book that are so disturbing," or whatever. How else are you going to get to the truth? The only way to understand these things is to face the reality that they happen. I mean, you have to be okay with the fact that the only motive that might exist for plucking somebody's loved one out of the world is that they have an axe to grind with the world, are taking it out on that person, and that they're getting a kick out of the fact that they had that power. If you can't face that reality, you're walking through the world with blinders on. And so that's the but I say this because this is not a person. Let's just say we're all lucky that a person like that is not God. Because that's not how it operates.
Brenda wants to know if you know the Lord.
Well,
Yes, I think.
let's remember that before I became a clinical forensic psychologist, I went to seminary and I had intended to become a priest. So but I think that's a deeply personal thing. I tend to take the Kierkegaardian approach that that kind of spirituality is a deeply private thing, and that we get too caught up in the public and bombastic, kind of ceremonial stuff of religion. But I think that a lot of the things that I think about and talk about are really born of a very great deal of alone time with in a kind of a spiritual zone, a spiritual place. And I think that I am, even though I may seem very extroverted when I'm on these programs, I think I'm really quite an introverted person, and that a lot of the intuition and sensitivities I have about things comes from imagination and spending time alone and really sitting with things, and then they sort of click. I've had times, I told you, Chris, I have times that I wake up from dreams or things, and something clicks. Remember, I texted you in the middle of the night one night and I said, I just woke up and had this insight, so it's like this weird, but it's like a kind of a meditation process. And I think part of what is so wrong with the culture now is that we don't have alone time with ourselves. And if one believes in God or whatever one believes, it's that inability to sit still and look inward that has destroyed, I think, so much of the culture, because most of us, if we tried for 1 minute, we'd be groping for our phone. I mean, the whole thing is designed to take us out of ourselves, and as a consequence, I don't think we can deepen. I don't know where you could go. I have to tell you, if I could prescribe anything to this batch you hear, it would be intentionally shut down and take a few days alone and listen to the small voice in yourself. And I think that's how you deepen yourself as a human and become a better person. Wouldn't you say, Chris? I mean, just a little less noise.
Yes, I think it's so important for that intimacy, right? Into me, see. If we look within inside of ourselves, then we discover who we are. And what was really interesting, because I learned it. I learned it from Jigsaw John,
Oh,
LAPD homicide, 43 years, this guy. And I met him one time, and he told me, he said, look, he said, when everything is buttoned, bagged and tagged and buttoned up, they've taken the victim out of a homicide scene. He says, I want you to take a chair and I want you to sit in that room. And every 15 minutes, rotate your chair from wall to wall to wall until you do a 360. He said, you will be amazed of what those walls will teach you about that victim and
Absolutely.
the story inside of that room. And man, oh man, I applied that principle. And I think, when we see stuff like this taking place, we are in such a hurry we are in such a hurry as a society. And I think this is just as an example of it. It's instant gratification without recognizing the totality of the circumstances here. It's an adversarial situation between the prosecution and defense. That's how our system is designed. But the other side of it is Lady Justice up there in the right corner. She wears a blindfold.
Right.
She doesn't see anything. And so with Dr. Brucato's statement here, and I've kind of paraphrased, what you were thinking, and I may have gotten it right or wrong, but I think people need to rest assured that now that the house is gone, it becomes a fantasy come true for the killer. The final moments and memories are locked in the killer's mind as a trophy, knowing the horrors that were inflicted. The killer decided who lived and who died, and now can add another chapter. The killer is the only one that has this insight and the sights and sounds locked away from the world and controlled in their memory. Today, no one will really ever know. It belongs now forever to evil. That house being gone, I think this comment right here, we won't know. To your point, Doc, if this individual, and he's presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, if he is responsible, it is 100% his show after today. And I said it in Barry Morphew when he was arrested. I said the defense is going to come on strong, and they're going to paint Suzanne as this adulteress, yada yada. And they went right down that line, man, right down that line, and they stayed there. In this case, there's going to be a whole bunch of other narratives coming, and for two reasons, I think that. I think the prosecution is way too confident by coming out and telling everybody through the school that, hey, you know what? We've got this. Don't worry, we've got this. When we read this, here's the school telling us about law enforcement needing more details to build a model. To me, as an experienced homicide investigator, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
This should be coming from law enforcement. It doesn't come from the university. And, then they fall back on this gag order. Well, isn't the university under a gag order? I don't get it. I just don't get this. And to me, this is an insult to every family member who lost a child in that home. That's just how I feel because, in June, all of this can happen. And now we're supposed to believe that for some reason this was all a controlled scenario. You know what I mean? That everybody's good with it and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying any soggy bread that's being sold in Idaho. That's just me.
Right.
It's just me.
But Chris, if you think that there's a feeling of a puppeteer, making everybody react a certain way now, wait until that trial.
Right.
Even when he stands there and says nothing, he's like a master showman. Everything that he does appears to be calculated for effect. And, what you're dealing with is a person that literally almost seems to understand that if you just stand there silently, you can project what people can project whatever they wish onto you, that you're some kind of martyr or that you're, hideous. It's disturbing, but I think that if there is a guilty verdict, this person will start to say, don't you want to study me? Don't you want to know me? Don't you want to find me? And especially because there would be the solution to the problem that was at the heart of all of this, which is, not knowing how to control people and get them to like you. So then the person says, I achieved it. See, and that's why I find paying attention to somebody like this so hideous, because they have, it's like Lacan used to say, never give in to the demand. We all did. We all did. Sitting around talking about that person. I went on a news program recently, and the topic of the without getting into which one it was, the topic of the program was this exciting story that the serial killer Keith Jesperson was corresponding with the accused serial killer Rex Horman, whom we've talked about many times. And there was a whole psychology to why I think he picked him to write to and all that, that he picked Horman to write to. But what I said at the end of the appearance was, this is Jesperson's way of insinuating himself into this and vicariously enjoying the attention that someone accused of similar things is enjoying, right? Like some kind of parasite that lives off of the offender, or more accurately from a scientific, or saprophyte, where you live off of a dead thing, right? So living off of the victims too, right? And so you have a person who you're giving attention to. So I said to them, maybe we shouldn't talk about this story. You're giving the person what they're demanding. And what I think is we're all going to feel those strings being pulled when that trial takes place, because everyone will be glued.
Oh, absolutely.
A finger movement, and it'll be front page news, And there's something about that fascination that disturbs me enormously, because the truth of the matter is he's not that interesting. I don't know what is so interesting about him. The reality is that if he's guilty, he's basically a garden variety creeper
exactly.
who killed people,
who operates in the dark.
Right.
Like you say.
That's it. Like, what is that person's contribution to the world? I don't understand. So, and my guess is before this, there were ways that person could have made a lot of contributions because of their their intelligence and other abilities they might have had, but went down potentially some kind of dark path. But I think you just have to pause a minute and say to ourselves, like, what is so riveting about this? Why this case? I mean, there are cases so much more hideous, so much more fascinating, so much more unusual. But I think it's the perpetrator. The perpetrator, the accused, has a personality structure that demands admiration, or appears to have, that demands admiration. And when you find yourself sitting there fascinated, remember that you're at the end of a string being pulled. When you say, let's tear that house down, remember you're at the end of a string being pulled. Right? That's when you're turning a blind eye to the sensitivities of families, you are at the end of a string being pulled. And that's what everybody is forgetting, that somebody is sitting there going, ha, 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 right? And I don't like that. That bothers me. So I don't know how else to put it, but that's how you get into how you have to think about the mind of a person like that. Wouldn't you say, Chris?
I will say anything that I just heard, and I agree with you 1,000%.
Right.
Because this guy, you pegged him from day one. And long before he ever came out of the woodwork, you said what you said, and everybody can go back and watch it. Now, so I've had you for an hour and 40 minutes. So I want to talk about real fast, let people know this Sunday, we're going to talk about Manifesto. And part of this is obviously Dr. Brucato is, the world expert on mass murders and shootings and all this other stuff that falls into those categories. and we're gonna break down some really interesting conversations that had taken place in our society. And I think at some point, maybe, he was leaking information as well, to the commented earlier, if it was Papa Rogers or Inside Looking and all this other, all these other personalities, that avatar personalities that were taking on a persona of their own. But we're going to get into the nitty gritty on Sunday night. So we want to invite you there. Don't miss it. Dr. Brucato is going to really go into, we're going to talk about Elliot, right? We're going to talk about Elliot, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And others that you have. But we're really going to get into understanding Incel and all these other people that do this craziness. If you haven't bought his book, please get to Amazon. You can order it through Amazon right there. And we were even talking about one of these days having Dr. Brucato is going to sign a couple of books, and we'll have a giveaway where you'll have to send your email address in. We've got an email that we'll just randomly pull an email. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're trying to figure that out, and we'll send it out to you. But that said, I think between us tonight, we had amazing ideas that presented themselves. Let's pray for the families, first and foremost, for Maddie's family, for Kaylee, for Xana and Ethan's family, that they somehow get some type of peace. And let's pray for the prosecution that they have something in totality that's going to, put a hammer on this. But I just still think they're too confident going into this thing based on some of my observations. But let's hope. That said, Sunday night, it's New Year's Eve. I'll be wearing some bells and jingles and all this other stuff. I'm teasing, but and Gary's going to be right there by the ball. He's in Manhattan, just down the street from Times Square, where it drops. Do you ever get bored of that, by the way?
Well, I don't really tend to go. You know how it is. When you hear something, you don't pay that much attention to it. It's only when you see it from the outside. But when you live right on top of it, you go,
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so
tomorrow in Australia,
So are you ready for the closing word tonight? Because everybody loves your wisdom. Are you okay with?
I don't know what on earth I'm going to say. I will say, Chris, one thing that I'd love to throw out there is that if you ever want to do like a special, maybe something where people, have to pay an entrance fee or something, but some kind of special event where I can teach the scale in the book.
Right.
And it would have to be something like that because the details would be very disturbing. So people would have to elect to attend such a thing. I think it might be a good way to maybe perhaps, fundraise or do something like that.
I think the Copeland Foundation's lining something up to where you'll have the ability to do that. And I think it'd be eye-opening as well as
oh yeah. Well, I have a lecture that I do on that to teach the whole scale.
Yeah.
It's a few hours long. It's as you climb the scale, by definition, it's more horrifying, more evil, so it's very difficult. But people learn an enormous amount. They love so if you are the kind of person who really wants to get in there, I'll get in there with you, but it has to be a place where it's safe and comfortable and people have opted to listen to it. But that might be something to think about. I'd be very happy to do it. And if it would, help generate income for some group or, maybe a donation or something, I'd be very happy to do it. And I know that there are a lot of people here who would love to attend. Because they read it and they have a lot of questions. They really want to internalize it. That is something I do for universities that teach the book, that teach the way that Michael and I, have thought about people. And it's had a great influence, I think, even on people that profile and kind of look at crimes and try to understand psychology of these offenders. So I'm very proud of that. And that book has done quite well. And but what I'm mostly glad about is that it's influencing thinking. Oh, I don't think Chris looks tired at all. I think you look like a schoolboy. But
What? Sunday night at 8:00, we're gonna be there. Make sure you guys are there. I'm gonna take the last word, and we love you. We appreciate each and every one of you, and thank goodness I look tired. What a wonderful day today's been in terms of life. We got the breath of life, but at the same time, what a horrible day this has been to tear that house down. I just think it's a big mistake, and that's
Do you want to end on that note, Chris, or would you like me to say something?
If you want to say something, wisdom, much more smarter than I'll ever be, it is all yours. I'm going to pull out, and you give us the close. And thank you, by the way, real fast. Thank you to all of our nurses, our doctors, our first responders, firefighters, police, everybody that's out there, our soldiers, Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, everybody out there that is serving this country. God bless each and every one of you. We are so grateful that you allow us to have the freedoms that we have. And thank you for all of you nurses, teachers, anybody that's making a difference in public service. We're grateful for you as well. And please send this video out. Hit the thumb, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not getting notifications, you have to hit that little bell thing. And when you hit that bell, then you'll be notified. But until then, Sunday night, Dr. Gary, you have the closing word.
Oh, well, I'm not sure what I could say that hasn't already been, I think, kind of said many times tonight and across many networks and many podcasts and in many articles and so forth, but somehow it still doesn't seem to be enough. The take-home point of all of this is that we are trying to compensate for a terrible feeling that we're left with, that it seems that in some way we can't quite put our finger on, that something happened here that seems like it was to the assistance of the accused and to the detriment of the families and the victims, because they seem to be gobbled up. And I think it is a beautiful thing to be surrounded by people who understand the ugliness of that, and who are so swimming in empathy that they are in horror. They find themselves in horror at the idea of that. That's a very beautiful thing. That means that this community constitutes a place that is the inversion of the kind of world that an offender lives in which everybody has a price and everything is cynical and everything is ugly and nothing really matters and the value of a human being is insignificant. What difference does it make if there's one less human being crawling on the earth, that kind of thing. And I think that what we do in this kind of setting is we restore a dignity to the human person. We are living in a deeply disturbing time that I think philosophically and culturally has its roots in the postmodern era, in which the value of an individual life has been lost. And with it, we've lost a sense of individual responsibility and morality. And this is extremely important because that has real world consequences. And we don't get it until all of that philosophical stuff comes down on a person that we love and know, who is then plucked out of the world by somebody with deeply disturbing motivations that exist in this twisted landscape in which we find ourselves. And so when an individual reflects or prays or meditates or chooses to do good, that individual is going out like somebody with a taper light and passing that little light to someone else, and then they pass it to someone else, and they pass it to someone else, until you have a roaring fire in the middle of that darkness. And I sometimes think that what happens in a life is that a person is given that little light, and they're told, your job is to get across life like a battlefield without that little light going out. and you've got to return it to its source. And that's quite a challenge, an emotional challenge. And so, remember, for those who have a more spiritual bent, because of course people are entitled to opinions and have different spiritual beliefs, and so we're speaking to an entire audience here. But for those who find themselves saying, all these terrible and ugly things happen, how am I supposed to believe in God? Remember that what Christian theology says is that God lost a child too. God also lost a child who was murdered. And therefore, what we have is a God in Christianity who has had a taste of his own medicine, has experienced humanity from the other side. And I think that's a very beautiful concept, whether one is religious or not. It's a beautiful thing to reflect on. I think that all of that having been said, the final word really does go to the victims and to the families of those victims. And they have all of our support and all of our love at this time. And we can really identify what it is that they're experiencing. And, we are here for them if they ever need us in any way. And I'm glad that they have all of you too. Take care.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down.